great morning so far. We've really enjoyed.
Good. That's great.
All right. Well, welcome to everyone. I'm going to give everybody a moment to just get on in here. I'm going to give them an extra minute. And for everyone that's in the room, I hope you guys enjoyed your regional breakouts or enjoyed grabbing your lunch or both, if that's what you did, because that's exactly what I did. And I still have part of my lunch sitting right next to me because it's been a long day. But we are so thankful to have you guys here. So we're going to wait until 12:46 to get started. And if you want to just put in the chat a hello, just to let us know that you are here and present, that would be awesome, so that we know that we're just not talking to a blank void. And hello to Alan. Welcome. Hello to my friends in the chat. All right, we got some more people in the chat. Good to know it's not a void. All right. Well, it is 12:46, and in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So first of all, I'm the moderator for this session. I am Douglas Price. I'm an FFA board member, and I'm also a foster and adoptive parent here in the state of North Carolina. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Trip Ake, who is from Duke University Medical Center. His full bio is going to be on your agenda under speakers, so you can certainly take a look there at all of the expertise that he provides to our session here. But for this session in particular, we are looking at trauma informed. And so without further ado, and for the sake of this, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Ake. And for those of you real quick, if you have questions throughout the session in the chat, you can toss those questions in the chat box. I'll be moderating that, and we will take some time towards the end to be able to ask those questions. So most questions won't get asked until the end. So if you ask one at the top of the hour, please don't fret. We did see it. It'll just be a while before we get to it. All right, Dr. Ake, I'm going to turn it over to you, okay?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. And good afternoon, everyone. So glad that you joined us. And I know that many of you have already had a very eventful morning with great sessions already. So I'm really glad that you're joining this session. I've been asked today to talk about trauma-informed parenting and some reflections on the use of a product created by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network called the Resource Parent Curriculum. I am a psychologist. I work in Durham at the Center for Child and Family Health, which is a private nonprofit focused on prevention, intervention, and training around prevention around child maltreatment and child trauma. A lot of our, if you've ever heard of the North Carolina Child Treatment Program, that training runs out of our center. And then a lot of direct services in clinic and in home visiting programs and in other services that come out of that center. So happy to answer questions about the center, but that's one of the places that I work with. These are a set of acknowledgements that I just want to make sure to note. These are centers that I want to name, funders and supporters, and then also just individuals that know that I've using some of their slide materials and that we do share. So again, I've talked about the center. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network is one of those places I would say, if you don't get anything else from today's talk, I would Google that. And it's just nctsn.org is the website. But they have so many resources for resource parents, for child welfare professionals, for mental health professionals, and the general public around issues around child trauma, including COVID, trauma-informed schools. There's just a ton of resources there. And I would say that that would be the place to go. That network is a congressionally mandated network that's funded through the federal Health and Human Services and Substance Abuse Services Administration, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. And then I'd like to thank the North Carolina DHHS and Division of Social Services, as we do a lot of this work in partnership with them. Thankful for the leadership from the Foster Family Summit, for the invitation, and then these colleagues of mine who who have contributed so much good content that that I'm hoping to pull from some today. So our agenda in the time that we have between now and 2 o'clock or so, and then I'm happy to answer questions as we get closer to the end, is defining child traumatic stress, defining trauma-informed child and family service systems, because a lot of times we hear about folks who ask about or talk about, like, how do we do our work as parents, or how do we do our work as part of the workforce in a trauma-informed way. It can seem really vague, and people might be unsure about what that means. So I'm going to try to provide some definition around that. And then some introduction to this actual curriculum, and may even have a chance to walk through some of the actual curriculum itself, so that you get a feel for what it looks like going through it as a resource parent. And then some discussion with you about trauma-informed parenting and what that's like, and hopefully we can have some good conversation there. So these are what I would call trauma exposure types. So these are the types of events that you may be familiar with. And really, these are the things that unfortunately are embedded in day-to-day life. They can be an acute event, which means it's happened once. It was a relatively big event, but it happened once in a child's life. And then there can be chronic or ongoing kind of events that happen throughout a child's development in life. So you'll see things like child abuse and maltreatment, exposure to domestic violence, community violence, sexual assault, medical trauma, traumatic loss and bereavement, accidents and fires, natural disasters, war, terrorism, and political violence. So these are the kinds of things that are on the short list of, if kids have been witness to these, or direct victims, or even in some cases, if they've heard a lot of detail about these kinds of things, it can be really distressing to them. It does not mean that if they have been exposed to or heard about or witnessed any of these things, that they automatically are going to show up with symptoms, right? So I want to make sure that folks know that we want to be mindful that these are important to track and be scanning and screening for, because they very often will lead to problems with development and behavior and other things like that you might see as parents. But it's not an automatic that'll happen. This is a term that's being used a lot by our medical community: toxic stress, defined as excessive or prolonged activation of the physiologic stress response. So this is that fight, fight, freeze response that we talk a lot about, and a lot of times just talking about what happens in the body as far as the chemicals, or the not chemicals, the different parts of your body, and the hormones and other things like that get activated, right? Traumatic stress is a term that we use more often, and thanks, Doug, for the reminder. Please do feel free to use the chat. I'll try to note that as we're going along. So if something's if you have a question about a definition I'm on, or want to ask if we're going to get to something else along the way, feel free to do that. But traumatic stress is something we talk about a lot more in our field around. This is that intense fear or stress response when kids are exposed to those traumatic events that I mentioned earlier, and it overwhelms their ability to cope with what they have experienced. My guess is, as foster parents or adoptive parents, kinship or therapeutic foster parents, you have seen these kind of responses, right, in kids, that these are sometimes the behaviors that are very clearly connected to an event that they've had in their life, and sometimes they're really confusing behaviors about, like, how is this connected? It might be, but it seems like it's really extreme response to something that seems like most kids might not have the same kind of response. Traumatic stress, though, is something, while some kids bounce back after adversity, traumatic experiences can result in significant disruption of child development, and we'll talk some about that. Again, it can happen if they've been direct victim, or if they've been witness to it. And again, sometimes if they've heard a great deal of detail about something, that can also be very distressing. The reactions do vary by age, but very young children can experience pretty intense emotions. So it's not the case that young children are somehow left out of this equation. They are very much a group that we're still keeping our eye on and thinking about how they can be affected by stressful events. Okay, I'm going to stop and kind of move to this resource that one of my mentors, Dr. Maya Jackson, contributed to, as this is, I think, what a lot of people look like when they're trying to filter through all these terms. And I wonder if you guys as parents are seeing the same thing of like, well, how does post-traumatic stress disorder compare to complex trauma? And how's that different than toxic stress? And how's that different from ACEs? And so this group said, that basically there's no single best term, right? And that we're going to, for the purpose of the talk, use the term ACEs, knowing that that term does not cover all events. If you were in a room right now, I would ask you all to raise your hand if you've ever heard of the ACEs study, and maybe you can put that in the chat if you've heard of it before, or if you've seen the resilience film, or if you've seen things on ACEs. Thanks, William. Yes, and add in things like anxiety and depression that may be symptoms. Yes. And so the original study, basically all the things in red on this chart are what was included in the original ACEs study, which was done by Kaiser Permanente in California on adults, thousands of adults, that basically they were looking at obesity research and they or chronic health kind of issues, and stumbled across this kind of thing about the more that people were exposed to ACEs as a child, the more likely their health outcomes were a problem. And it was a huge study that was done, many years now ago, but it did not cover things like community violence, natural disaster, forced displacement, school violence, lots of things that we would put on our list on this chart that are included in what we talk about child trauma. And so this chart also talks about within the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, within this core data set, we saw 40% of the kids that were served by network sites across the country experience 4 or more types of trauma or adversity. Some included in the original ACEs, but many of them not. And so just something to kind of keep in mind as we're talking about it. So I want to shift as we think about, okay, if we're defining trauma, and now we're talking about what is a trauma-informed child and family service system. This is a very long definition that the network has provided, but I want to highlight a couple things. Trauma-informed child and family service systems recognize and respond. So even if we just stop right there, for resource parents like you, it's important for you to recognize that maybe a child in your home has been exposed to traumatic events, and then respond and thinking about, okay, how does that change my parenting? What do I do different now as a result of knowing about this child's trauma, right? And so my guess is you have tons of examples about, I know that this happened in a child's life that's been placed with me, and as a result of that, we shifted in the way that we explained how our routine looks, or we thought about maybe we don't lay all the rules down today. Maybe we start small and build out from there. Or maybe we know that there are certain things in our home that could be a trigger for a child. And so let's think about how do we minimize triggers in our home. So these are things I think you already probably do quite a lot of. But some people, when they talk about what does it mean to be trauma informed, they just need to know, like, recognizing that trauma is real and that it's very critical to kind of assess for and think about, and then what do you do as a result of knowing about it. The other thing I'll just point out in this slide is another way that these systems are trauma informed is that they act in collaboration with each other. I don't know about you guys, but I've seen a lot of examples in and outside of North Carolina where some systems don't work well together, right? So maybe in one county, DSS and the domestic violence agency and law enforcement all work together really well, and maybe in another county they don't. Or maybe schools are like really on top of things and they work really well with parents, and in other counties they may not. And so what we're finding is the more that parents are in the role of being trauma informed, they often can be the most trauma informed person on their child's team and have the opportunity to advocate for, hey, I think my kid really needs this. Or, hey, did you know that when you're doing this in your classroom, that actually scares my kid? Is there a way for us to talk with the therapist about how caregivers can be more involved in the sessions, because I feel like we need to be more connected. And most of the evidence that we know for treatments that work for child trauma actually have a pretty big caregiver involvement, right? So these are the kinds of things, if you were collaborating, that could happen. This slide kind of talks about screening as an important piece, but another really important piece is that we're using the best evidence for what we know works for kids who have experienced trauma, that we're thinking through a cultural lens. And I think today, even more than ever, we really need to be thinking about what messages, what background, what history, what culture are kids coming from, and how do we take that into account? Also, how to strengthen resilience and protective factors. So I've heard some people really see trauma-informed practice as a parent and resilience-informed practice as a parent as very different things, that they're on a completely different continuum. And what I'm here to say is being trauma-informed means that you're also looking for opportunities to strengthen resiliency. So they're actually not completely different. They're actually part of the same thing. And I think that want to make sure that folks know that we don't want to discount resiliency, because we do know that kids are highly resilient, and that there are factors that we know make for helping ease some of the blow of what trauma has to offer. And typically it's involved in what you do as caregivers. Most of the resiliency literature research talks about one caring, consistent caregiver, and what power that brings in helping offset some of the stress that kids have after traumatic events occur. All right, I'm still on this definition. I promise I'll finish with it. So the other thing is that we have to think about addressing parent and caregiver trauma. If the numbers that we know are true around how many kids are exposed to different types of violent events or maltreatment, the same can be applied to caregivers. And if we're not taking care of resource parents, or we're not taking care of bio parents and their own reaction to traumatic events, it's going to be hard for them to support the kids who they care for. And so another thing about trauma-informed systems is that we think about how to take care of our parents. Again, feel free to use the chat as we're going along. Hopefully I'm not going way too fast. Hopefully it's relevant. This is hard to do virtually and not to be able to see you, but feel free to let me know if we're on the right track, or if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to stop. And then thinking about, thank you, Doug. And then think about for the staff. So if you think about the workforce, meaning I think resource parents are a part of the child welfare workforce, in my mind at least, but other agencies and their staff as well, we need to be taking care of those folks, because this is hard work. It got even harder in the last year, right? After COVID started, like what used to be hard is like really hard. I know I've heard of several resource parents who they were having a short-term placement that they were helping with that turned into a much longer placement because of COVID. Or parents that had services in place for a child that were disrupted as a result of COVID. And what that does for family systems, it's a big deal. Okay, I think I'm going to move forward. And this graphic just kind of helps to talk about, when we're talking about trauma-informed work, it's not only just awareness training like what we're doing today, but it's also training around like what to do, around skills, about like what to say when a kid presents with certain behaviors or those types of things. And then also addressing our beliefs about those behaviors, about what trauma means, about what healing looks like. And that influences our daily interactions with kids. So just to kind of think about that. And that if we're making our staff or our workforce more trauma aware, then we're going to be more trauma responsive in our practices, and that our agencies are going to be trauma sensitive, right? This is one way of kind of looking at it. Okay, I've been moving a lot. I'm going to transition some to RPC. Let me just pause and see if you guys have any questions about what we've covered so far. I know we said we are going to wait to the end, but I feel like I want to just check in. As we think about the definitions of trauma, as we think about trauma-informed systems, as we think about some of the things that we know work for kids as far as evidence-based treatments, and I'm gonna go into this curriculum that goes into more detail about what does trauma-informed parenting look like. But I'm just curious if you have any reactions, and maybe I should ask for some of you, does this relate to anything that you're involved in as a parent? Does this connect in any kind of way? And maybe you can kind of let me know how. People are thinking. All right, that's fine. Feel free to keep typing if you're in the middle of a thought. I'd love to. I'm going to stop and read it when you come across, but I'd love to just kind of know how this is sitting with you, because I'm throwing a lot of information at you, and I want to make sure that we're doing it. So this is helpful with the transition of the news placement who's moving in at the end of this month. Good, Doug. I'm glad. Sheena, thank you for letting me know that this is helpful and kind of matching where you are. Great. Yeah, so as you think about for Doug and for others that have had kids move in, one of the things that I'll just say that resource parents, I feel like, can like one question that you can ask when kids come into your home that I think is totally trauma informed is there something that we can do that can help you feel safer? Right? So, and we're going to talk some about the differences between physical safety and psychological safety, because even though we can show that we're really safe parents, kids may not believe us when we tell them that, right? So Cindy's saying the system doesn't understand that caregivers have trauma as well. Yeah, and I think that's Cindy, it may be that they don't understand it, but it may be that they're just not sure what to do with it, right? Or they're scared to ask about it. But I agree that it is important for us to think through that lens of how do we support caregivers. And then we're still new to the process of just taking it in. Okay, great. And then most of my children are impacted with trauma, diagnosed with PTSD. Okay, so Michelle, maybe you have some experience with what it looks like to parent a child with anxiety as a result of trauma, and what it looks like to connect to providers who provide therapy. And I'm happy to talk more about the kinds of therapy that we know work best. I love the chat, by the way. I love this. So we could do this. I'll just keep taking in what you're putting here. So they don't know what to do with that trauma. Yeah. Maybe it's the system is aware, but doesn't want to scare off their very limited resources. Doug, this is a perfect point. I do think that's true. I think that's true. If you're trying to kind of say, we need as many resource parents as possible to help us with child placements, and you don't want to like rock the boat with the people that are doing this work by encouraging them to seek support or help or like identify an issue or a problem. I think it puts people in this kind of double bind. And Michelle, I'm glad to hear that your home is very laid back. That's a great quality for kids who have anxiety is that it's predictable, that it's consistent, but also laid back where maybe you can roll with the punches a little bit better, maybe as maybe than other parents. And then we're seeing as a first-time foster parent of 2 young children, lots of trauma, struggle with the weekly visits with biomom and the memories of these visits prompt. Yes. So I think that anticipating behavior leading up to a visit and anticipating behavior once kids come back from a visit is something that resource parents can really benefit from, and how quickly kids can respond so well to just a very consistent, predictable environment when they come back to you, and what kind of support resource parents need with other resource parents to deal with the frustration around these kinds of things, right? To be able to call another adult when the kids aren't around and aren't listening to you and say, I'm just so frustrated because it's so hard when we know that these visits sometimes can be so distressing. And recognizing that staying connected to a bio parent is something that kids desperately want. And how to honor that while also kind of keeping things consistent is something that's important. You guys are great. I love this chat. Okay, I'm gonna move forward, but keep it coming, and we'll just take it as it comes. So let me introduce to you, if you haven't heard of it, this is the National Child Traumatic Stress Network about 10 years ago rolled out this very long title at the top: Caring for Children Who've Experienced Trauma, a Workshop for Resource Parents. So it turned into resource parent curriculum. And of course, that turns into an acronym, right? So RPC is something that you might hear. We have RPC facilitators in many counties across the state, and it is something that we continue to train child welfare and mental health professionals to provide. There's a public-facing roster on the North Carolina Child Treatment Program's website that you can locate facilitators close to you in your county to see if they offer it. So let me talk about what it is. It's a trauma-informed in-service training. Emphasis on in-service. So it's not a pre-service. This is not MAP. This is once you have already been licensed and you have a child in your home, or you have had a child in your home before, this is the training for you, versus you're on your way to becoming a resource parent and kind of thinking about what to take into consideration. It was designed by the NCTSN to assist resource parents in recognizing the impact of trauma who are involved in the child welfare system. It's included in the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse, which is, if you're not familiar with that resource, a great place to go if you've got a new acronym of a treatment and you're not sure, is it any good or not? Is it relevant for kids in care? What kind of evidence level does it have? And that's the place to go. So RPC is not like a evidence-based treatment. It's gaining evidence for what it does, but it is listed and included as far as the description and relevance for child welfare in that clearinghouse. So I would say check it out there. The other thing to note is that it supports, the RPC really does support the North Carolina Child and Family Service Plan and diligent recruitment and retention efforts. And included in those efforts is by 2023 that RPC is available to all foster and adoptive families in North Carolina. That's a pretty big goal, but it's something that I think the state's interested in. And then also, we see it in multiple places in these documents. So it's something that the division is very supportive of and has been helping to roll out and think through as far as how we train facilitators and make it available. And so it is totally relevant. What does it look like? It's, again, for foster, adoptive, kinship, and therapeutic foster parents. They're 8 2-hour sessions. They're typically in the evening. So pick your one night of the week, like a Wednesday night or a Tuesday night, 2-hour blocks for 8 weeks straight. Each session features activities where caregivers apply concepts that they're learning to their own child that's in their home, or a child that used to be in their home, so that they have these things called My Child worksheets that they spend time kind of drilling down to, okay, I learned this concept. How does this apply to my kid? Which I think is one of my favorite parts. And every session includes interactive group work and discussions, which I think resource parents are really used to. But it's also quite a lot of content to go through. Typically, they're led by two people, a staff facilitator who's either a child welfare or mental health professional, and a parent facilitator like you, with lived experience, who maybe has gone through RPC before, and the two of them together present the content. And I feel like it's so useful to have those two voices at the table, so that you just have a more rich discussion and appreciation for how this information kind of lives and breathes. These are the modules. These are the 8 nights, if you will. Trauma 101, understanding trauma's effects, building a safe place, dealing with feelings and behaviors, connections and healing, becoming a trauma-informed advocate, and taking care of, sorry, I'm dropping things, taking care of yourself. And so, so these go by very quickly, but I do think that it's just such rich discussion around what exactly is trauma, how does it impact our kids, and what does that look like? Why is it important? It's a difficult topic to understand. It gives parents a place to be able to talk about these complex issues. There's an actual real-life application. And what we've seen is a pretty powerful shift in perspective, which I'm going to show you in just a little while about the data. Dr. Kelly Sullivan, one of my colleagues, let me use these slides, and actually emailed her yesterday to say, hey, I'm going to be presenting, and can I use some of your slides? And she said, sure thing. So what does it actually tell you? So as we think about all these different things, in the end, we're all interested in child functioning and placement stability, right? Like, we want to make sure whatever we're doing, our hope is that this helps keep kids in placements without going from placement to placement to placement. We know from the research, the more times kids change placements, the harder it is for them in many, many ways. Their functioning, their relationships, their grades, there's so many different things that kind of point to the more placements that you have, the harder it is for kids to do well, or the more kind of barriers that are going to be placed in front of them. So as we think about child history of trauma, child functional problems, and how that brings stress to the relationship, and then thinking about the resource parent curriculum is really targeting parent attitudes. That is what it is targeting. And beliefs about child problems, because sometimes as a parent, it's easy to walk away from an interaction with our kids and say, I'm pretty sure that kid did that on purpose to make my life more difficult. And what RPC has to bring is, like, that could be true at some times, but there's also some things that are really confusing about kids with trauma and the way that they show their feelings, because a lot of times they don't have the words to talk about their feelings, and so it comes out through behaviors. And sometimes the behaviors are really confusing and really complex and really big. And so so if we can change parent attitudes about some of these things, then it can help with the relationship, and then ultimately help with child functioning and placement stability. So this is kind of where RPC comes into the picture. We have a few papers that have been published. This is the very first one on RPC at all, and that was from our group and some of the work that we're doing here in North Carolina. We have a multi-site study that is including North Carolina and other NCTSN sites that are doing RPC. So this is one of the ones we'll highlight today. The kinds of information that we're collecting are things like demographics, module evaluations about, like, how satisfied parents were with what they were taught, or a satisfaction with the entire workshop. This knowledge and belief survey is at the beginning and end of the session. That's probably one of the most important, because we see changes in parent knowledge, beliefs, and kind of their tolerance level of certain things. And then follow-ups, and some have some things that we might see there. I'm sorry, I'm just following the chat a little. And then we see in our initial study, we had mostly foster parents with some therapeutic and and then folks who maybe identify with more than one type of parent, maybe they're both a foster and adoptive parent. And then the multi-site study, most of the parents were foster parents. So was parent reaction to RPC satisfactory? Yes. So we see pretty big numbers around the materials were clear, they would recommend it, they also wanted more of it, and it felt like it met their kids' needs best. The kinds of things they really enjoyed were the case examples, the information that was provided by the parent co-facilitator, the activities, and the My Child worksheet. Did parents' knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes increase related to trauma-informed parenting? Yes. So we see these three areas: trauma-informed parenting, tolerance of misbehavior, and parenting efficacy. So those are the things that are more like how confident they were in their role as parent. And we see significant improvements regardless of where they were geographically or what type of parent. In our initial study, we saw kinship providers as one of those groups that did not seem to respond as well to things like tolerance of misbehavior, but that we thought that that might be related to their relationships with kids and families. But the multi-site, when we had more groups and more participants kind of included in more geography, we saw significant improvement. This is one of the things that I wanted to point out. So at the very beginning of group and the very end of group, all three of these are actually statistically significant, where we see parents felt like they knew more about trauma-informed parenting, that they were seeming to have more tolerance of misbehavior that might be trauma-related, and they felt more confident in their parenting. So just to kind of give you a sense of like, what does RPC actually do? Did they report behaving differently as a result of RPC? So this is a question like, how much in the last week have you applied what you've learned? So we see most people are saying at least sometimes to very often that they are. Has your participation in the workshop helped you understand your child's behavior? Everyone's saying either somewhat or very much. Has your participation in the workshop improved the quality of your relationship? And we're seeing good numbers there. Has your participation in the workshop made you feel like you were better able to meet your foster adopted child's needs? And again, we're seeing the same thing. And then there's a one-time kind of 3-month follow-up looking at placement stability, where 95% of these 60-ish kids maintain their placement or move for a neutral or positive reason. So let me just stop again for any kind of questions, because I thought I might walk through some of the one of the modules of the curriculum. Thank you, Gail. I'm glad this can be helpful to look at, like, what does this curriculum actually do, right? Because it seems like it's the right thing to do, helping resource parents look through a trauma lens to see, oh, this behavior is about trauma. It's not about my kids really struggling more than most kids in general, or that my kid's personally trying to like make my life hard. And that maybe that helps me to consider things, a little differently. Other comments that people have, or other reactions to some of the information? I know that statistics can be interesting for some and maybe less interesting for others, but I thought maybe we'd share some of those. Okay, people are thinking or typing, and either are fine. Okay, so this is gonna be hard to do because, oh, thank you, Lindsay. Just finished week 3 of RPC. Oh, I'm so glad. And I'm glad that as a researcher, you're seeing these results are nice to see as well. Yeah, so I'm glad that we have someone who's actually in a group, and I'm glad that you're utilizing what you've learned. I think it's one of those things that, so I'll just tell you real quick, this curriculum was created by about 30 experts in the field, and it took them 3 years to do. And the reason is because they could not agree on the content. You can just imagine that, right? So these folks that are kind of in the community, they're also in academic centers, they're, and they just can't agree. And I think what happened is they ended up creating one of the best products that the network has ever made, because they really struggled with it for a while. And I feel like it makes information just so relevant. So I'm so glad that, Lindsay, that you're able to speak to that. Great. And if others have comments, I will track them as we're going along. I promise. Okay. So we're gonna suspend reality and pretend like you have been a part of an RPC group for 3 weeks, like Lindsay. Okay, Elizabeth says, what is the foster child age spread studied, and which group has had the most improvement? So Elizabeth, I think so far so the ages of kids of the parents in group have really ranged anywhere from birth to 18. And some, with kids is in the early 20s that are there. I would say every group that I've been a part of have kind of like the split, typically of really young kids, parents of really young kids and parents of adolescents. But it's really ranged the gamut of resource parents with kids in those very different age groups in the home. So I don't know if that helps answer it. For the follow-up study, the 3-month follow-up, I don't know what those numbers are as far as the placement stability piece. But yeah, we in most every one of our groups, we have a pretty wide range of ages represented for kids who are in care. Okay, yeah, sure. So if we're suspending reality for a minute, we've been through, like, you just pretend like you're Lindsay for a minute. You've been through 3 weeks of RPC. And so this module is on building a safe place. And so I'm just going to walk through a couple of the things that we would say, okay? So in the last module, we focused on understanding the impact of trauma and of the kids who come into our homes. Now we're going to start looking at ways we can help kids to recover and become more resilient. And so one of the essential elements of trauma-informed parenting is helping kids feel safe. And so, I'm an adoptive parent. I remember going through background checks, having a home study done, having my fingerprints made, and I could prove to most people on paper that I'm pretty safe. But when kids come into our homes, all that evidence that we have really doesn't matter a whole lot. In fact, it doesn't really matter at all to them, because they don't always feel safe being in our home, even though we can tell them and show them that we're safe. It doesn't really matter. And so we have to show them over time, which is what we're going to talk about. So if we were in a group, I would say, I want you to think of a specific time in your life where you felt scared or worried. We're not going to have you share it in a group or now. But I want you to think about what it was like, both physically and emotionally, what situation or incident happened. If you wanted to write it down, even just like a key word or something to kind of remind you about what it was, as long as it's not something that's too distressing, right? We don't want to create something that's really hard for you. So if it's the most difficult in your life and it's really distressing, find a different one that's slightly less that way. And I want you to think about, what did it take for you to feel safe and secure after it was over, after the scary thing happened? What is it that made you feel safe? Was it something that you did? Was it something that somebody else did? Was it a belief, like a spiritual belief? Was it going to a special place? And if you're in a group, we would give you some time to think about that and write that down. And for those that are comfortable, to be able to share, what was it that helped you feel safe, right? And so then we would talk about that exercise that we just did helps us think about that the fact that physical safety is not the same thing as psychological safety. You can be physically safe, but kids with trauma and adults may feel unsafe long after they're out of danger. This is the kind of thing where I think you as resource parents are stuck with what we call being a trauma trigger detective, where you're trying to think about, what just happened that led to that behavior that we just saw? And why is my kid feeling so scared when nobody else is scared? I'm looking around like, is there something we should be scared about? I don't see anything. And why is my kid feeling that way? And so that trauma trigger detective part of the resource parent work that you do leads to this kind of idea of like, okay, even though you are safe, there's something about right now that helps you not feel safe. So how do we address that? So your child's definition of safety won't be the same as yours. Like having heat, some of the things that we take for granted, like having heat in every room of the house, or cereal in the kitchen cabinet, or on the other hand, actions or activities that we consider comforting, like a pat on the shoulder or a hot bath, may have very dangerous overtones for kids who have been physically or sexually abused. And so to help these kids feel safe, we as resource parents have to look to the world through a trauma lens, right? So that's what we're trying to kind of do. And so we know that kids who have been through trauma may need more control or reassurance or information to feel psychologically safe. These kids may have valid real-life concerns about their own safety. So it might have been for a long time they were maybe they're the oldest of a sibling group, and they were the ones who were kind of parentified and had to take care of all the other kids. And so even though you're saying things like, I actually am making dinner for you, I promise that we're going to have dinner tonight and I'm going to provide it, their experience has been that adults won't do that, right? And so so how do we appreciate that, like, their safety and their survival has kind of depended on themselves at times, or and how do we inch our way into that to kind of demonstrate we actually are going to be taking care of you. We understand that you might not feel safe, or believe that we'll be able to do that. Some kids may find it difficult to trust that adults can or will protect them. Some kids are super hyper aware of any threats that might be, and it might seem illogical or unreasonable to us. Some kids may have trouble controlling their own reactions to any threat. I don't know if you've seen this happen in kids before, but some kids like that have experienced trauma are super good at like noticing things that we would never notice, right? Or they're super focused on something that we're kind of like, what's happening over there, and why are we so kind of focused on that? And the reason that is because they've learned that safety means that I have to kind of be on alert. And it may take some time for kids to understand that maybe you're going to keep them safe, and that they don't have to worry about the same things in your house. But it doesn't mean that that transition's easy for them to just say, oh, we're in your house. It's different here. You're not going to hurt kids. You're going to make sure they give kids what they need. That takes some time. I'll give you one more example of one of my colleagues talked about that I think is just so good when we talk about triggers. And so she talks about this as far as like being a trauma trigger detective as a resource parent is hard. So she talked about a parent that was in a group and said, we didn't realize for the longest time what was happening in our dining room. And we finally kind of just had to pick it apart and figure out over time, like, oh, this is the reason that dinner is so hard. So it seemed like there were some nights at the dinner table that this child had no problems at all. Perfect behavior, eat dinner, no problem, ready to go to bed, no problems. And then other nights that it was just a struggle. There was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of behavior, there was a lot of like trying to talk about like if-then statements, like if you do this, then this will happen kind of thing. And here's what they noticed. The child sat in a seat that was facing a door in their house. And on the nights that door was open, the child had a lot of problems. And on the nights that door was closed, the child had no problems. And that door led to a basement in this foster parent's home. And in other people's homes prior to coming into care with this parent, the child had very different and scary experiences in a basement. Now, how could this parent have known that that was what was going on without really kind of putting on this trauma lens and thinking through what might be causing this to be hard for this child? But that in the end, all they needed to do is just close the door, and that was it. They were fine, but they wouldn't have known. Think about the scenarios you might have in mind about, like, have you ever been a kid in a home where somebody wanted to make sure you ate your peas? Like, we are going to stay here until the cows come home until you eat these peas, or like, got in a struggle of, like, this is what's going to happen at the dinner table. That could totally be happening for any of us without knowing the door needs to be closed and the peas will get eaten, right? That's not something that's on our minds, but that for this family was the way it worked out. And these are the kinds of examples all over the place that parents have to struggle with, of, like, what is this behavior about? And it takes some curiosity and some kind of awareness of, like, maybe there's something else here that I'm not seeing, versus why is this kid acting so badly? Why, like, they're a bad kid, or they know what they're doing. And there's been nights they've eaten their peas no problem. They know what they're doing. They just decided today that they're not going to do it, right? You could see how that would be really easy to get into as a parent, of, like, thinking through that lens, when for this family, being a detective led to, oh, this is actually something that's not about us. And it's not even really about kid today. It's about a kid and their experience before. And these are all the kind of hard things that it looks like to bring together. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple more slides, and then I'm going to stop for questions, because I'm not sure where people are, and I feel like I'm having a great time by myself, but I'm not sure if you're, like, tracking or if you're with me. Okay, so there's another slide here about promoting safety. So these are some ways that you guys already know some of these and probably use them, right? To help traumatized kids feel psychologically safe, help them become familiar with their home and neighborhood. So I'm thinking, earlier Doug was saying that he's preparing for a transition into his home. This would apply, right? So thinking about when a kid comes into your home, helping them become more familiar with their home and neighborhood, so they, things might feel less foreign. Giving them choices and responsibilities so they can experience a sense of control over day-to-day life. To say, like, this is the room that you're going to be in. Would you like to have a glass of water in your room at night? Would that make you feel safer, or not? Do you need a nightlight? Do you not? Like, what are some choices so that they can have, and actually giving choices that are choices, right? So if it's not a choice, don't give it up as one, because then it gets really frustrating. But if you're okay, if you're kind of laid back with things like Michelle, if your home is pretty laid back and you're okay with either of these choices, then this is the way to go. Setting limits so they don't feel overwhelmed or responsible for more than they can handle. Setting limits to me means, like, when kids come into your home, give, like, the top 2 safety rules, not the 20-page contract that has every behavior and consequence that goes with it the first day they get there, which can be really overwhelming. Give them some idea about what's going to happen in their future. So, like, letting them know, okay, so here's our routine tonight. We're going to have dinner around this time. These are the kinds of things that we'll have for dinner. Then after that, here's what's going to happen, like helping them predict what's going to happen next, and making sure if there are adjustments that you think about how to let them know as soon as possible. Seeing and appreciate kids as unique and special kids. Providing opportunities for them to express themselves. So this is when a child feels more known and understood by the people around them, and they don't feel as much like a stranger. And then help them maintain a sense of connection and continuity with their culture and with their past. And if you were in our group, like Lindsay, in Module 6, which is coming up in a couple weeks after this one, then we would be covering a lot more about those connections, about connections to bio parents, and why that's both hard and really important to think about. Okay, last one, and then I'll stop, I promise. Okay. Giving a safety message. So when a child comes into your home and they've had trauma in their life, maybe spend some time with a social worker or caseworker to know more about about what their history is, but also can they stay in your home for the first hour or so to participate in this kind of safety message, right? So that social workers and parents are seen as a team and they're putting this together. Get down to the child's level and use language that's appropriate for their age. Promise to do your part to keep the child physically safe. Avoid making promises that are unrealistic, right? So things like nothing bad will ever happen to you again is not what you want to say, because you cannot promise that. But let the kids know that you'll do everything you can to keep them protected. Ask them what they need to feel safe. And I think, again, if that's day one and you're asking them, that's a powerful message to a kid to know, oh, I actually have some power here to maybe say, I'd like to have this as a way of keeping myself safe. And if it's not something that's okay to you, that's okay, but you have at least a place to start with the conversation. As you give a safety message, follow their lead. Don't push. If they seem distracted, nervous, or unwilling, just take their lead. And for very young children or kids that were traumatized at a very young age, they may not have the words to tell you what they need to feel safe. And so at least let them know that you still care about their needs and be ready to talk if they are ready. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop. I have a lot more slides that you'll have in a handout. And I think I'm just going to go to the end with my contact information here. And then I see some questions starting to go in the chat, which is great. Please feel free to start kind of either a reaction to what we just went through if you were in that group, or some questions. That would be great. So Doug's asking, strategies when kids are too young to verbalize or nonverbal, in reference to asking them things directly. Any other thoughts? So Doug, make sure I'm getting your question right. So for kids who are really young, we're thinking about when we ask them questions, like, are there tips or thoughts about how to do that in a appropriate way? Is that what you're thinking?
I'm just thinking about like when we're trying to come up with good strategies to help them feel safe, but allowing them to be the ones that kind of inform that of
Yeah.
what makes them feel safe. And obviously with toddlers who are not fully verbal yet, or if we have a child who is nonverbal,
Yeah.
what does that look like? What are other strategies? Because I can't just flat out ask a 2-year-old the same way that I could a 10-year-old.
Well, you could say, like, you could have like choices of any kind of transition or support objects. Like, would you like this bunny or this bear? Would you like to sleep with either one of these or both of them? Just to kind of give some kind of sense of like a choice they can physically kind of make. Or you can like at least come up with some kind of yes/no system of like, and when you have choices, like, would you like this or this? Or you can try to, like, again, have it something they can point to, or that they can say yes if they understand. I think the other question is like how much we know about our kids, the receptive language, like what are they able to understand or not? And if we're not sure what level of understanding they have, then I think that really trying to just take their lead and spend some time getting to know what words do they use, what words do they understand, what kind of, some maybe from the worker to talk about how they've seen adults communicate with young kids. I'm not sure when the handouts will be made. I'm happy to, I sent a PDF ahead of time that maybe is going to be emailed out. If you don't get one, this is my email address. I go by Tripp, but in the South, sometimes you get two names, right? So I'm George on paper, but my nickname for a long time has been Tripp. And so just email me and I'll send you the PDF if you don't get it from the FFA folks. But they should be able to get it to you. Doug, does that help as far as like initial kind of thoughts about strategies with young kids? Okay, great. So what are some other kind of comments, questions, examples that people feel like they want to share? Maybe people are typing now. But I was trying to kind of give you a sense of like, if you're in one of these groups, and Lindsay, maybe you can shed some light on like what it's been like for you too, like if others are kind of curious about it, but just to kind of get a sense of like what content's being shared, what are some of the kinds of even shorter activities that are used to help people think about how things apply. And then at the end, there's a lot, every night there is a My Child worksheet that relates to the content where people have one child in mind for the entire 8 weeks that they map those concepts onto, right? So they can think about like, okay, so what do we know about Johnny's trauma history, and what do we know about routines that are really easy for him, or what do we know about what helps as far as a safety message for him, or what do I want to try as far as a safety message that I haven't before? So I think that those are things that just to kind of keep in mind. So Michelle's reminding us to be aware of our own triggers so kid can't push your buttons. It's okay to walk away. Yes. Such excellent advice, Michelle. So, and sometimes it's hard to know what our triggers are until they've been pushed. But I would say knowing, and if there are other adults that are co-parenting in the house, to be able to have some kind of tag team system set up of like, I need a break, I need to walk away. We talk a lot in this curriculum about being an emotional container. So this idea of like when kids bring emotion, we don't like bring more emotion, like to kind of make it bigger, but that we try to like contain it or back away, or almost this image of like clearing out the room, letting kids emote, and then when they're done, being able to kind of come back and put the furniture back and say, okay, let's talk about it. And so, but I think it is super insightful, Michelle, to have the idea of like, I need to know what my own triggers are. And sometimes there's triggers that are unrelated to kids, right? I know if I don't have enough sleep. I know if I don't have my coffee in the morning, which I don't drink coffee, but some people would say that that's their thing, right? Or that I am just not in the best space. So here, how do we arrange our routines or the way that we respond to things based on kind of minimizing those kind of problems, and that it is totally okay to walk away. And what you might notice is some kids, when they see you walk away, their behavior could increase because they might be worried about what that means about parents leaving. And so I think also just having something to say when things are calm about sometimes you have big emotions, sometimes I might have big emotions, and if I walk away, I'm not leaving you. Like I'm just leaving the room. I'm not leaving the house. I'm still here, but I want to make sure that I think before I say things too. And so here's kind of what I'm proposing. TJ, I'm glad that this is good information and that we're focusing on the need of what is and is not the behavior. Yes. So but I think we get caught up, and it's easy. I'm a parent. I get caught up in the behaviors too about like, what do we do about this behavior? But taking a step back and being able to say, okay, what's the context? Is it on certain nights of the week? Is it in certain situations? Is it a time of day? Does somebody need a snack? Like all these kinds of things I think is important. Lindsay saying it's helped to hear what other resource parents have experienced and helped you feel supported. Always great to connect with other resource parents, and that you're admitting the virtual RPC. Is it Mondays at 6, which is hard. It's around dinner time. Yeah. Mondays are long, but it's so worth it. And glad you signed up. Great. Yeah. So I think that finding the right time, Lindsay, is hard. And I'll say pre-COVID, when we would do groups, we would often have facilitators arrange dinner so that everybody can kind of eat, and then they would often have childcare so that they can eat, and then somebody would take kids to one spot and somebody would be facilitating with parents in a different spot. And while it's easier to kind of log in one way, it creates another set of barriers that are just kind of hard to to deal with. I will say that some RPC facilitators have opted to take their parents' lead of starting their group very late. We had one group in Durham that started at 8 p.m. During COVID time because kids are asleep and that kind of stuff. So our facilitator was super sleepy after those, but I think it met a need. So hopefully that'll be something. And Michelle saying that she tells her own kids and family that she needs a timeout. Yes, I think that's a great way of communicating. Look, you're not in trouble. I'm trying to be thoughtful about what I say. I'm going to take a timeout. I will be back in about 10 minutes. So I think that makes sense. And Doug's saying, we do practice walking away. As parents, we tell them where we're going, make sure it's in a space where we can still be seen. So not closing the door, not hiding in the closet, right? So I think whatever has worked for your kids about, and I think makes a lot of sense. These are also conversations that you can have when things are calm, right? So the planning around these to say, I am so glad that today is a good day. I am glad that we are getting along right now. I just want to have a conversation about, like, if at any point I got upset because of something that's going on with me, not with you. Here's what I would like to try to do. How do you feel about that? Right? So Doug might say, I just need to go in that room right over there with the door open. Would you be okay with that? Would that be something that, because I do need a timeout from time to time. Like sometimes you need a timeout. And so, or here are 2 or 3 choices. Would either of these that I'm okay with, would any of these make you feel more comfortable? But I think that could be a conversation, but I don't think we think of those things when things are calm. They tend to come up when, like, things are on the rise, right? And I think that's the really tough part of those conversations. Those are also the times I think resource parents make decisions about rules or consequences that are also not easy. And I'll say, as a parent, I'm totally guilty of this myself too, and have to kind of keep myself in check. But when people are at their peak, both kids and parents, it's sometimes the time that parents say, "You will not have TV for a year," right? Or like big things like that. And then you're also thinking to yourself, that means that I don't have TV for a year because I have to make sure that they're not having TV for a year. And so, so really trying to reserve the calm times for some discussion around what to expect, or like, how would we handle this, instead of waiting until it gets to that bigger place, I think can be helpful. Good. All right. Other questions or comments people have? I know we're starting to get close to time. I'm going to stop sharing screen. So maybe let's see there, so that we have less of the space kind of with content. But I'm just curious about any other kind of reflections. And Doug, as you've been listening, and I wasn't in the morning sessions this morning, so I'm curious about, how does this complement? How does this connect to some of the material that you guys talked about earlier today?
Well, you guys can certainly spend some time putting that in the chat. I'll mention that since I was moderating, I've been only able to transition from one session to the other. So
yeah. So it's hard to have them all in your
yeah.
head. It's hard to have them on your head. Yeah.
But hopefully some of the other people in the chat will be able to connect some dots for us, because that'll be
awesome.
Super helpful.
Yeah. That would be great, because I saw who was speaking and what they're speaking on, and wanted to be able to join, but had some other commitments, so I didn't get a chance to hear those. But I'm hoping that these things are connecting together well enough, because this is ongoing and hard work. Let's see. Why don't I also, if I put something in the chat, it goes to everybody, right?
If it'll let you. Oh no! Did you just do it as a private?
Yeah,
chat?
it just went to you.
So hold on, I can do it on the back end.
Okay, that is this is a resource that I would just say, if people want more information about, like, solid information about Q&A with developers of treatments about how to talk to kids about sexual abuse, or how to talk with therapists about trauma-informed therapy, or what happens, how do we talk with kids about COVID? Or there was even fact sheets and information that were put out around some of the events that occurred this last year that were just so hard, like how to think about like race and trauma, thinking about DC, thinking about like other things like that. So I do think that it's a good resource for so many different audience groups, including parents, that that might be something to kind of check out. And then there's one more. I'm sorry, Doug, I'll put this in here. This is the Learning Center. So this is a free resource through the network as well. This is a place that if you do a free registration, you can go in and like take courses for like credits, hours, those types of things, and see webinars and other things with the same people in the network on a variety of topics, including like trafficking and other things like that that could be relevant to some of your work. They have a whole child welfare committee that helps create products that are relevant for resource parents and for child welfare professionals. And I feel like there's a lot of good content that the network puts together. It's really pretty amazing. They have like 115 funded and over 160 affiliate sites in the network across the country, and all those groups are mandated to collaborate. So they're actually funded, or the funded sites are funded in part to actually work with other sites, which I think leads to some really great products and kind of practices. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. And I know you guys have a closing session maybe at 2. So maybe this is a good place to pause, but feel free to reach out if you have questions after. And I just appreciate so much the opportunity to be able to present today. So thanks, Doug, and the group for the time.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Ake, we so appreciate your time, your resource, your energy, and your expertise that you brought today. We appreciate all the links that you've also provided to us. So definitely make sure to check those out. And you gave us your contact information. So I'm sure if we have follow-up questions, we can feel free to reach out to you guys, to you in particular. And then for anybody that's still hanging around, if you still have further questions and whatnot, or need other guidance and resources, you can contact us at info@ffa-nc.org, and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction. So everybody, we do have a 2 o'clock session, and I will see you there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.